Today's guest is the founder of Viotas, Paddy Finn. You're very welcome to the Scaling Your Business podcast.
Thank you very much, Rian. Thanks very much for having me on.
Yeah, you came with a great recommendation from a friend of mine, Devin Hughes, the founder of Buy Me. I want to go back to the very beginning. I looked at your LinkedIn page and noticed that you grew up in Galway. What was your favorite part of growing up out west?
So I grew up in Banaslow, County Galway, actually. So right on the Galway-Roscommon border, and
Nice.
actually where I grew up, our house, it wasn't that it was a very big house, but it had been extended. It was originally in County Roscommon, and there was an extension built into County Galway. So it was a case that I slept in County Roscommon and ate breakfast in County Galway, and it was really
Amazing.
it was out in the countryside. So when I was young, growing up in the countryside, I had just kind of so much freedom. So like me and my brothers used to be into like building, kind of racing buggies out of Volkswagen Beetle chassis and taking engines out of old, what now would be hippie vans, like, the Volkswagen vans and that, and making all of this kind of stuff. And, so we used to be able to then traipse around the fields in these and even the bogs and that. So I think kind of the freedom of growing up in the country was really good. But I guess as well, like my friends would have all lived quite a bit of way. So they would have, let's say, been living in housing estates and stuff like that. They would have had a good collective around them. Whereas I suppose I had to make my own entertainment and be pretty creative in building things, making things. But it was always a good house then for people to come to because, we could kind of get away with doing things that you wouldn't get away with doing elsewhere.
Yeah, the creative part I like. The most creative story I've ever heard is someone they were born in 1960 and they cut the roof off a Beetle and used it to sail down a river.
Oh, really? That's
Yeah,
gas.
crazy.
But I remember, like, when I was like, I don't know, 10 or 11 years old, my brother would have had one of these kind of Beetle racing buggies and that. So when he was away in college in the week, he had taught me how to drive it and that. And so friends used to come down to the house. So instead of like your conventional climbing a tree, we'd throw a rope up over a branch, tie one end of it onto the buggy, put a foot loop in the other, drive forward in the buggy, and then it would just hoist the person up into the tree.
Amazing.
So it was that kind of stuff.
You certainly lived a good childhood then. Did that have any influence on your degree in electronic engineering?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, actually, for me, I suppose the path to kind of going into electronic engineering was I had originally planned on studying, hoped to study aeronautical engineering, and then my second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth choices, I'd say, were actually mechanical engineering and that because I really liked the mechanical side of things, and I think I was reasonably good with logic and reasoning and that kind of stands to reason there. And then in my leaving cert, I was good at school, but I kind of blew hot and cold when it came to exams. And my leaving cert was certainly an instance of cold. So I missed out. And I would have been reasonably good in terms of like. With maths in school, but the one thing was that I was really bad with rote learning. So like the theorems and that, I had to understand them to be able to. I had to understand everything to be able to apply it. So I
Yeah.
couldn't really just rote learn. So then I missed out on the honour in maths in the leaving cert, which I really shouldn't have, right? But it was just on a kind of an on the day thing, and my points weren't as high as expected. So I ended up getting like the seventh choice in my CEO, and that seemed horrendous at the time, right? It just seemed like, oh God, will I go back? Will I repeat the leaving cert? What will I do? And I actually got into a course which was just electronic systems, and so my plan was, I remember I got in touch with UL, and so I was in the University of Limerick, and they had told me, look, if you do really well in first year, you can transfer into a different course, and you might have to go back into the first year of that course. But in studying electronic systems, I realized, actually, it wasn't the mechanical side or the aeronautical side that I wanted. I loved electronics. Electronics were incredible. Your ability to, to take something from, an idea of something that you'd like to of something that you'd like to make, something that's going to actually do something for you, and then to be able to actually design to get the electronic components together to be able to design it and actually have it physically in front of you and doing something was amazing. So then I decided actually it wasn't aeronautical that I wanted to go into. I wanted to go into electronic engineering, so instead of electronic systems, into electronic engineering. And thankfully, when in first year, like I did, like college, that side of things, it just it just resonated with me. So like I was able to do very well in first year, and then able to transfer into second year of electronic engineering, and so that kind of brought me onto the path then that I ultimately followed, and really absolutely thoroughly enjoyed it. And as well, I suppose it's funny because having coming from having, you know, the maths haven't been the problem in my leaving cert, and engineering maths being thought of as one of the most difficult branches of maths, that it actually, I found it easy once I got to university, because everything that you were studying, you were looking at how it's applied.
Yeah.
So you know, it was all about the rational reasoning of it and everything like that. So it all just made sense. So it became one of my, you know, one of my strongest subjects throughout college, having been my Achilles heel previously. You know.
Cool, cool. I do have some specific questions around your time at UL, but before we move on from, let's say, young Paddy growing up in Ballinasloe, curious to know, if you take yourself back to, you can pick an age, 8, 10, 12, what was the dream job for Paddy back then?
Uh, kind of, I think a typical little boy's dream of wanting to be a pilot. So I really wanted to be a pilot, and I thought that would be an incredibly interesting career, and you know, the ability to travel and all of that. But I suppose then as time went on, and you kind of start to look at, well, what would a day in the life of that look like, and more so, what would a year and a career in the life of that look like?
Yeah,
It kind of wouldn't really appeal to more the kind of, I suppose, the engineering creative side of me. So I fairly figured out that that wasn't for me. And so then I guess for me then after, like when I would have been looking at my career going forward, security was going to be very important to me, because I'm one of 6 kids in my family, and I so like it would have been, you know, and my parents would have come from the era where my mother had to leave her job when she got married. So it was effectively, she
mm,
worked in the public sector, had to leave her job and that. So I think things, you know, things would have been reasonably tight. It was never made apparent to me that things were tight growing up, but in retrospect, when I look back, things were absolutely very tight. But my parents, one thing that was incredible is that we all knew that we had, that our path was to go to college, which I think I just thought was really you know, incredible
standard.
from my yeah, it
Yeah,
felt standard. But when I look back, the challenge that must have been for my parents to actually make that a reality, and thank God for county council grants to actually be able to get into college, so that I was able to kind of go on and do what I do now. I wouldn't be able to do anything that I do now had I not kind of followed that path and been able to kind of get those opportunities. But for me, then I think it's always been very readily apparent to me that if you do the same as everyone else, you'll get the same as everyone else. So you need to work harder. You know.
for sure. Sounds like you've got a good set of parents. Focusing on your time at UL for a second, in a previous interview I've listened to, you spent some time, I don't know how long, working at Intel as part of your UL degree. That combined with working at companies like Crystal Energy and Resourcecraft, you're now the founding director of your own company. I'm curious to know what lessons did working with others teach you?
Um, so I guess in working in Intel, I was on co-op while I was in college, and I suppose some skills I got there was that helped me to actually overcome a real nervousness around presenting. That was huge. But one thing it really taught me was that uh, it did not appeal to me being a very small cog in a very big machine, in something in Intel. Like, that was a real lesson there, and
Mm,
particularly when I would have seen a lot of engineers in Intel, and they would have been talking, and they would have talked about everything in terms of like the different types of products that would come through different steps of the process, and they all had like code names for different types of product, etc. And I suppose was these guys really thought that they were, they would have been speaking very fluently with these code words, etc. But when you asked them what they actually meant, or what was the underlying technology behind them, did that mean, was it a different type of processor? Was it a different cache in the processor? Or what was it? They didn't know. So they were very, like, they were very good at with a very small subset of
mm.
what they were doing. They were excellent, but they didn't really get much of a view as to how that fitted into a bigger picture. And I just thought that was very unsatisfying. Like, it would be very unsatisfying for me, certainly. And so that, I suppose, would have kind of been like that not quite for me. And I'd never thrive in that environment. I would be very much if I was there and I was working on that type of stuff, I would be a 9 to 5er, and I would be trying to find other ways to fill, a fulfillment. And then I suppose as well, when I was in fourth year in college, actually, myself and a friend, we imported some cars in Japan. So we started kind of importing some cars in Japan, and that kind of got us some extra money in fourth year in college. And I think that was actually a really good lesson for me, because where that lesson was that, look, I was 20 years old, so I was just turned 17, starting college. So I was 20 years old in fourth year, and I remember, like, the idea of importing a car from Japan just seemed like, oh, look, that's ridiculous. That's for somebody else to do. Somebody who has a company that imports cars is that. But what it was a really good realization that, well, hang on, so it doesn't matter whoever this someone else is. If they can do it, then it's possible to do it. So what would stand in our way of actually doing this, right? So me and my friend, we set up like an account with a company in Japan that we could get to go to auction for us and get to do shipping for us and all that. We set up with Irish customs, and we set up a Japanese bank account and stuff like that. And we just said, let's give it a go. Let's just throw in a few quid each and just see what happens. See if something comes to Dublin Port, or do you get, like, I don't know, you get a box of lead arrives or something, I don't know. And look, and it worked, and it was cool. Then we brought in some other cars, brought in some nice cars and that. But it was, I suppose, at that point in time, it was kind of like on the verge of the downturn. So when we kicked it off, like, there was plenty of guys, young guys out there doing apprenticeships and stuff like that, had plenty of money to their names, wanted to buy Japanese sports cars, so you could, you'd have them sold before they'd even land in Ireland. But then these guys didn't have jobs, never mind money anymore, to be spending on Japanese sports cars. So that wasn't going to be a long-term plan, but it was never going to be a long-term plan. It was just a kind of let's give it a go and just see. But a really good lesson with that was that well, if somebody can do it, there's no reason why you can't do it. And then when I was then I started into my PhD after electronic engineering, and so my final year project supervisor in UL, he asked me, he said, look, would you be interested in doing a PhD? We've got some funding coming up in this topic called demand response, which is ultimately what my career has turned into, is demand response. And I still remember the first time when I had to go in for an interview for the scholarship. So I remember, like, Wikipedia was my friend, all of these, I was there online going, what on earth is this thing that I need to talk to? And actually finding out about it, going, this is actually really cool. And so I started the PhD, and during that I got to know Resourcecraft. They're a Limerick-based power metering company, and like a really fantastic company that I really admire because of their engineering-centric approach to problem solving. So it's Liam Relihan and Frank Casey run Resourcecraft, and I suppose particularly with Liam, just seeing his approach, that he when he was looking at let's say challenges for power metering and being able to, let's say, validate the energy usage on large sites, etc. Liam's mind pretty quickly moved past the question of the problem and moved on to the solution, like, as in figuring out what the solution could be. And I suppose I would have learned a lot from Liam in terms of his practical approach to problem solving. And that was kind of actually just during my PhD, just to get some time, a little bit of real world time, actually seeing how some of this operates. And then while I was studying, I started reading this horrendous document called the Trading and Settlement Code. So the Trading and Settlement Code is like the Bible. It's the rule set of how the electricity market, how the financial side of the electricity market works in Ireland, right? So it sets out all the rules, how we have to do everything, and it's it's hundreds of pages. It's quite complex stuff, but it's but I found it really interesting to read it. And one of the things that I started to kind of realize is that there isn't a major barrier here to stop anybody setting up an electricity supply company. So an electricity supply company, I would have almost thought that to be a big utility, your first starting step is you already have to be a big utility, as if like it's a kind of a closed shop, right? And to be a big company, you have to start as a big company. And looking at this, it became kind of apparent that, well, no, there isn't any major barrier to entry here. It's possible to get involved and to be an electricity supply company, because what most people don't know is that the electricity market is actually, there's a wholesale market. It's like almost like a cash and carry for electricity. So all power stations on the power system sell into the electricity market, and then all supply companies buy out of that. So even if you have like Electric Ireland having both generation and a supply company, the generation still sells into that pool, and the supply company buys out the same as all the other suppliers, right? And you don't need to own the generation. You don't have to own it. You can actually just be a buyer out of that pool and buy it for the same price as everyone else buys out of that pool, right? It's kind of the price is set every half hour depending on what generation is needed. So it's like, okay, so you can just go in as a supply company and set up an electricity supply company, buy from the wholesale market like anyone else, and then sell on to electricity customers. And at the same time, I was kind of going through that thought process. A gentleman called Joe Hodgins, who used to actually be in senior management with ESB in the Moneypoint power plant, and had since gone into, he has a company called Hodgins Architectural Facades to do like big curtain glazing on big commercial and industrial buildings. He was looking at kind of getting back into the electricity market. He'd been away from ESB for a while, and he approached our research group about something I can't remember, about something in UL. And I remember when I was talking to him, I was saying, look, I'm kind of on the same parallel thought process as you here in terms of set up an electricity supply company. So I was involved then with Joe during the startup of Crystal Energy. And Crystal Energy would have taken on then some large industrial electricity customers and that, and it offered what's called a pass-through electricity tariff, where the customers would actually get the half-hourly price in the wholesale market plus a small margin for the service. And that then, I suppose, that was a huge lesson in, like, if we go back to the lesson on with the importing a car from Japan, and you go, God, if somebody can do it, then why can't I do it? Well, setting up an electricity supply company was that lesson on steroids, where you're going, something that I would have thought it was a major barrier to entry. You had to be somebody else. You had to have, I don't know, either be born with a silver spoon in your mouth, or you needed, to have I don't know, you had to be a large company to engage in a certain activity to start with. This was a real lesson in, no, you don't. If you can set up an electricity supply company that's selling, tens of thousands of euros worth of power a month, and you can start that from scratch, then what really is unsurmountable for somebody to actually want to do, and so then there's kind of very little limited opportunity for innovation on the electricity supply side of the market, really, in my mind. So what I did then was, instead of kind of continuing with Crystal Energy, we used Crystal Energy then to actually, so instead of me looking to take a stake in it or otherwise, I kind of came away from that and instead said, look, how about you fund time for me to do a postdoctoral research fellowship in UL. So basically, Crystal Energy, if they put in X amount of money, the Science Foundation of Ireland would back it with an extra 2/3, and that then gave me bread and butter money while I wanted to set up what was Electricity Exchange and is now Viotas. That's what we did there, and that kind of moved me then in towards setting up Electricity Exchange with Duncan O'Toole.
If I've understood this correctly, just for pretend I'm an alien as the first time on planet Earth, I imagine this big black box in the center of Ireland, that there's demand and then there's supply, and people can generate energy for this big black box, and then the providers can go sell that to the general public.
Yeah, exactly.
I've got the basics of it there.
That's the basics of it there, and it's like so you might be familiar with EirGrid, right? People are familiar with the name, but nobody knows what they do, right? So I would equate EirGrid as being if power stations and wind farms and the likes of us in the power system are like the players in an orchestra, EirGrid is the conductor of the orchestra, and EirGrid is listening to what you and the audience wants to hear. So basically, whatever power is needed at any point in time, EirGrid conducts what generation is needed to actually be online, and they do that in both the planet day ahead, and they also do it in real time. And then after that, an electricity supply company, actually the function of an electricity supply company might surprise you, is that all of they are is really administrators. So what they do is they're the collectors of money. So the flow of money in the electricity market is that electricity customers pay in. That money then has to be dispersed between ESB networks. First of all, the power stations for actually generating the power. The air grid is what's called the transmission system operator. So they get the power down through the arteries of the power system. You have to pay them. ESB networks then are like the capillaries, the distribution network that gets it to your house. So what your electricity supply company actually really does is take the money that you pay them and then pay each of those parties on your behalf and keep a fee for it. That's what an electricity supply company is.
Okay. And ESB themselves aren't one of those electricity supply
They
companies. So
are
they get a bigger piece of the pie then.
So they basically they fulfill multiple functions. They own an electricity supply company with Electric Ireland. Then they also own a generation and the generation side of the market, and they also own infrastructure that gets the power to you as well. So they just have effectively businesses that operate in multiple areas.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I'd regret it if I didn't ask. Going back to the Japanese cars, do you have a favorite car at the moment?
At the moment, yeah, absolutely. So I'm lucky. I have it. A Tesla S P100D.
Nice.
So I was. Look, it was a massive thing for me to get. I think the fanciest thing I owned before I bought the Tesla was a Ted Baker water bottle that my wife got me. I'm not a real kind of like
Spender.
it's a spender on fancy things. And then but like look, you can imagine that car just appealed to everything in me. Really, and the autopilot, it's the fastest accelerating car and all that. And I kind of don't know where I go from there, which is like but I have no reason to change, but I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, for anyone who's connected with you on any of your social sites, they'll notice, it won't take them long to notice that you are a scuba diving instructor. So I'm interested to know, what's one thing that you're into that not a lot of people know about?
Okay, so the scuba diving instructor, one thing that I'm into. So recently I've started to try to learn guitar, actually. So
Nice. Is that the guitar behind you?
that's the guitar behind, and it's actually down to the fact that with scuba diving, it takes like a full day to go diving, and I'm involved in it with a search and recovery dive unit. I live in Killaloe, just outside Limerick, and so I'm involved with a search and recovery dive unit here and that. And but like to go diving just takes. I don't have a whole lot of time, but I just wanted something like to just take my mind off of work for, I don't know, 20 minutes here and there. So my wife for Christmas bought me a guitar to start learning because I'm quite void of talent otherwise, and there's nothing else that I can really do that's a good demonstrable skill.
Nice. Very cool. Again, Googling your name, you'll see EY Irish Entrepreneur of the Year Finalist 2008, Limerick's Best Young Entrepreneur 2014, Ireland's Top 30 Under 30, Limerick's Top 40 Under 40. A ton of awards. One of your Instagram pictures is just an award unit, probably bigger than some Premier League clubs have. For anyone considering putting themselves forward for the likes of EY Irish Entrepreneur of the Year, what are some of the benefits that you've seen, and what words of encouragement would you have for those that are on the fence?
So this is it isn't for you, it's for your team. Like, so really and truly, like our team and anyone's team who's kind of at our stage of business, they just work relentlessly on trying with the total interests of the company at heart, and these are the people that you have to have involved in during kind of startup and initial growth phases of a company. And what these awards do is they provide a really good validation to the team as to the effort that the effort that they have put in is recognized, and also that it stands up when compared with some incredible companies that we have been that we have competed against for these awards. That it really does validate that what they're working on is is being recognized and is actually being seen to be making a difference. So really, I think that for these awards, first and foremost, it's for the team for that. The networking opportunities with these as well is fantastic, and it is certainly good for the marketing of the company, but as well, and not even just for prospective clients, but also for our existing clients. And the messages of congratulations that we get from our existing clients are fantastic. That they really do enjoy seeing our name in the paper as who they're working with, because again, look, at the stage we are in business, we have personal relationships with these people, so they feel invested. Our clients feel like they've been part of our growth story as well. So when they start seeing the recognition there, I think they also feel acclaimed to success.
You pointed out something very interesting there. I had a friend that came to me recently, and he didn't want to put himself forward for awards because he thought it was kind of virtue signaling. And I said to him, one reason why you should put yourself forward, and you picked up on it there, was to showcase to your current clients that they're currently working with the best.
Yeah.
Very, very solid point. The company you own at the moment, Viotas, an article came out in December 2020 to announce that you're hiring 60 new jobs and that you have opened or are planning to open your first international office in Melbourne. What are the future plans for Viotas?
Yeah. So I can start off with the plans, and we can go through some of the mechanics of what we're doing with that. Absolutely. So at the moment, we've set up a very strong company here in terms of capability. So the different capabilities we have in the company allow us to achieve a huge amount of a huge amount of innovation, delivery of services, and also to maintain a lot of flexibility. So we call ourselves a full stack company. So we have a 24-hour operations center. We have sales. We have field operations who install equipment on site, and we provide services. But we also have hardware engineers that can start with the building of a printed circuit board, and the design of a printed circuit board. So if we have an idea and we find that there's no technology to help us achieve it, we can start at brass tacks and go, well, let's develop the technology from ground up. Awesome. So then I suppose it means that it gives us great capability when we look at international landscape. The electricity market is evolving incredibly quickly. To be able to bring more renewables onto the power systems and electricity markets are having to change very significantly, and this creates good opportunity. But it can be quite hard to foretell exactly what the next changes are going to be. Now, we've had a good track record in that, but in order to be able to capture them, you need to be very nimble. So, and we're well placed for that. So, in terms of our upcoming growth, we're planning on rolling out to. So we have our operation in Australia now. We've got recruited an excellent team there with fantastic leadership and a fantastic team on the ground there who are starting to grow the business there. We've set up a research and development office in Krakow in Poland as well, just in the last few months. And we're planning then to roll out to a further 8 markets over the coming 4.5 to 5 years. So it's now about transitioning the business from being an operational business that is doing the underground work to building the business that's actually building the infrastructure within the business that's able to spawn these new businesses, spawn and manage these new businesses remotely. So that is the real key to the real, I would say we're a late adolescent. As a business, that's where I kind of see us as a stage. We're kind of gone from the childhood stage where ad hoc is fantastic. Ad hoc is what you need as a startup. It gets things done. It's too much process as a startup would just will kill you. But then once there's a kind of a point of inflection after which process and structure are just the key to growth. And so. In terms of like the running of Viotas is myself and my business partner Duncan, of course, a fellow co-founder, and we're both very, very aligned in our views as to what's needed to grow the business. So we spent the last year then put together a good senior management team in the business. Let's say kind of pre-COVID, we had about 27 on the team. We now are up over 60, and we have a further 60 jobs coming online, and about a further 100 120 going to come on abroad. And I suppose we've spent the last year looking at working on making sure that we're building the internal fabric in the business that can actually achieve that, rather than setting out to start setting setting up a load of international operations, and then going, how on earth do we actually sustain this? How do we, even things that, how do you manage the internal communication within the business and all your processes and flows and that? It's too late to start it then. So the work has been taken on that over the last year.
Yeah, interesting you say internal communication. I was chatting to a guy who has a company and he's achieved hyper growth in the last couple of years. I think there's 500 employees at it now. There was 60 maybe 3, 4 years ago. And he said he's done this multiple times. The line of communication breaks down at the 150th hour. Anything beyond that, it completely breaks. So you need to plan ahead and consider that that will happen. Very, very impressive. And it makes me smile to see Irish businesses are growing. You mentioned Melbourne, very familiar with Australia. I lived there for a year, 2015, 2016. You also mentioned Krakow. I'm assuming you've traveled before. Pretend COVID doesn't exist, or fast forward when it's disappeared and you can travel again. What's the first city or country you're going to go
to? For business?
It doesn't have to be business or pleasure.
No, so I think get straight down to the team in Melbourne. So we've fully remotely put together a team there, and we want to get down. I want to get some of the team here down to them. I'd like to get them to visit us as well, because they are a fully integrated part of our team, but we're only getting to talk to them like this. And I think to get down there, and also for they've been remarkable at assimilating our culture, but I think that will be bolstered as well by us getting to spend a little bit more time with them. And we also need to make sure that that'll help us to refine our process of instilling culture, the culture of the company, in remote operations as well. We need to get to certainly polish that as a capability. So down to Melbourne, unfortunately, by the looks of things, it'll be their winter when that arises.
Yeah. It's still a cool place to go to. I'm actually hoping to get, my best friend's getting married next year. I'm hoping to get back out there as well myself. I've really enjoyed the conversation with you today, Paddy. The final question is, do you have a current book that you're reading or a podcast that you're listening to?
Not as such. So I definitely kind of vary my appetite for what I'm listening to. So like, I work atrocious hours, really embarrassing hours.
Yeah.
Like, so I work typically maybe 4 in the morning, so my typical kind of cut off during the week. And I just tend to I actually tend to listen to a lot of tutorials, because so what I listen to is there's a lot of tech innovation going on in the company, as well as being CEO and CTO of the company. And it's long past the stage where I could fully keep abreast and on top of absolutely everything and all the intricacies of the innovation that's going on in the company. But I still need to be able to have an educated conversation with all the team and be able to kind of plan in terms of a technical strategy around, like, you can't plan your technical strategy unless you know the envelope of capability of what can potentially be achieved. So I think a lot of the time when they hear trying new software development languages, or there's perhaps even a new silicon semiconductor that we're looking at using or something like that, what I tend to do is put on in the background tutorials on YouTube and just listen to them, just keep them in the background while I'm working away. So I'm just trying to learn a little bit all the time about perhaps new systems that either we know to be of interest to us that we're using, or things that we maybe are featuring on our radar that might be of interest to us, and we could do with just learning a little bit more as to how it might fit into our kind of tech ecosystem.
Paddy, I wish you continued success in the future, and I hope that you enjoy your trip down to Australia.
That's great, Rian. Thank you very much.